Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Mr. Wiz here. It's always good to see you guys here on my channel, ready to learn how to build video games. So, if you've been following along in the videos, you've learned a lot of material. Let's be honest. We've covered a lot of ground when we've been learning about MakeCode Arcade. In my classroom, this is now the point where I would open it up to you and ask you to start working on your own game. So let's talk about what that means. How do you take an idea and develop it into a fully playable game? To do this, we look at the design process. Now, the design process is not unique. You'll see it in lots of places, written sometimes in different ways. So before I show you the one that I use in my class, let's look at some other ones that you'll find. If you were to Google design process or engineering design process, some of the charts that you would find online. I want you to notice the similarities between them specifically. So here we have one that starts with ask to identify the need and constraints, research the problem, imagine possible solutions, plan by selecting a promising solution, create a prototype, test and evaluate the prototype, and then improve and redesign as needed. So this is obviously from techengineering.org. So yeah, this is a perfectly good design process. It goes through the whole plan, the whole cycle, from starting with an idea to learning more about it, brainstorming some possible solutions, making your plan, creating, testing, improving. The creating, testing, improving is a really important part of the design process, and you'll see that in all of these. Next one here, this one comes from Project Lead the Way. It starts with defining a problem, generating some concepts, so that's like brainstorming a solution, right? Then developing the solution, coming up with that plan that we just talked about in the last one. Constructing and testing, evaluating your solution, and then eventually presenting the solution. So very similar to the last one, different wording, but same basic idea. This one starts with defining the problem, collect information, brainstorm and analyze ideas, develop solutions, build a model, present your ideas to others for feedback, and improve your design. This one comes from the Chicago Architecture Center, very similar to the other ones. This one says ask or define the problem. Then we have generate ideas, select a solution, make the item, evaluate the item, make needed changes, and present the results. This one comes from EdTech Connect. I'm not familiar with that company. But yeah, all of these are very similar at their core, even though their wording might be different. They all cover the same basic idea. You come up with your problem, you create some ideas for it, you do some brainstorming, you make your plan, you build, and then you test and improve and eventually publish it. So this is the design process that I use in my class. Remember those game goes I showed you guys a while back that my students use to test games on? So Tinkergen is the company that makes these, and they also made this graphic as part of their learning materials. So I really like this graphic, and it's very similar in concept to what we were just looking at for the engineering process. We start with a concept. So what is our idea? What is the big idea behind our games or the game that we want to make? So a lot of these other processes started with a problem. When we're coding video games, we don't usually have a problem, right? The problem is that we want to build something fun. That's our problem. It's pretty standard. Now, if you are working at a larger company, that problem might be more defined. For instance, if you're working for Bethesda, they might come to you and say, hey, we need a sequel to the very popular Skyrim game. So that might be your problem, right? And then you have to start brainstorming a solution to that. But if we're independent game developers, the problem is just we need to make something fun. So our first step is really that concept step, coming up with our idea. We'll talk more about that in a minute. After that, we have the MVP, the minimum viable product. This is also the prototype that you saw some of the other charts mentioned. So after you come up with your idea, you develop your brainstorming concept, There is a little bit of planning. It's not on this graph, but that's where I would put the planning in between these two, right? So after you come up with your idea, come up with a little bit of a plan, and then develop your minimum viable product. This is your prototype. This is a simplified version of your game. And when I say that, I mean that, right? So if you wanted to build a basketball game, your prototype would really just be testing out the physics of the game to make sure it works correctly. Can you build a game where the player can throw a ball into a hoop and scores a point? Can you create the overlap codes that work correctly for that? Can you create the gravity that works correctly for that, right? So the prototype is just the bare bones of your game. If you're building a racing game, your prototype would have the race cars. It would have a simple track. It would have a finish line to make sure that it works the way you want it to work. Prototypes do not have all the extra stuff, the sound effects, the animations, any of that fancy bells and whistles. The prototype is just to make sure your concept works. And that's important, because what do you do if your concept does not work? If no matter how hard you try, whatever your idea was, it just doesn't seem to be creatable. You can't seem to code it. At that point in time, you're probably going to want to tweak your concept. You're probably going to want to make some changes to your original concept, some changes to your original plan. This is why the prototype is so important. If you skip this step, then you could end up wasting a lot of time on something that's not doable. And then you end up wasting and losing all that time. This is why we use the design process. The design, let me backtrack. It is entirely possible to just sit down on MakeCode Arcade and start building a game. You could do that, sure. But without a plan in place and without using a process like this, there will be a lot of time and energy that will be wasted. In my class, when we work on this project where the students get to build their own original game, I give them usually no more than 2, maybe 3 weeks in total to build an original game. Now, that might seem like a lot of time, but it's really not. So if you waste time, if you skip this process and you try to jump straight to building the game, you will end up wasting time, and that will hurt you in the end. So you may end up with a game that doesn't feel finished or is missing important parts, or worst case scenario, a game that just doesn't even work because you didn't spend the time planning and building your prototype. Okay? That's why we have this process. So let's go back to it and talk about why this is so important again. So first step is coming up with our idea, coming up with our concept, and coming up with our plan. Then we build a prototype just to make sure that this works correctly, right? If we can't get a working prototype, we need to change our idea. Once you have a prototype that is working, where the basic idea of your game is working, that's when we can start going to the testing phase. This is when I would have my students usually ask a classmate, sometimes a family member or a friend, but usually a classmate, to test their program, to test their prototype, and to see what they think. And since it is the first prototype, it's not going to be a finished game, and the tester should know that it's not a finished game. And it's okay to talk to them and be like, here's some things that I'm planning on changing later, but what do you think about it right now? So the testing is a huge and very important step. And a big part of testing is getting valuable feedback. When my students test their games with people, I always make sure that they ask them questions like, what can I do to make this better? Or what would you change? Or what do you recommend I change to make this game better? If somebody tests your game and the only feedback they give you is, it's good, did they really give you valuable feedback? Did they give you anything you can use to make your game better? No. When you're doing the testing phase, make sure you're getting valuable feedback. Make sure you're getting information that you can use to improve your game. Now, do you have to make changes that they recommend? No, you don't. It's your game, not theirs, right? So you don't have to make the changes that they recommend, but you should still hear what those recommendations are, because you might want to make a different change that their ideas inspire in you, right? So after testing, we have the learning phase. This is when we take that feedback and we fix problems, we improve the prototype to reach completion. So we're making the changes that we feel will make our game better, okay? So we get some feedback from people, we make some changes to our games to make those games better. Once we've done that, we can look at our game and we can ask ourselves, does the game meet the plan? Does it match our original concept that we had for our game? If this is our first testing and feedback situation, then the answer is going to be no. Because remember, our first game was just a prototype. It was a rough draft, right? So if it doesn't meet the plan, then we just go back and we make our changes and we do the testing and feedback all over again, right? So this testing feedback loop, you will go through over and over and over again. And when you do that, make sure you're using different testers. Don't always use the same tester. You want to get feedback from all sorts of different people. So you test, you improve, you test, you improve, you test, you improve, and you go through this loop over and over and over again until eventually you feel like your game's done. Your game is doing what it's supposed to be doing. And this is when you make the last improvements. So this isn't in this graphic, but I should probably create my own graphic at some point. Before we do the official release, which is the last step, there's the polishing step, okay? The polishing step is when you add all those little final touches to your game to make it perfect, right? To make it really, really ideal. So what do you do in the polishing step? The polishing step is when you would improve your sprites. Maybe make them better graphics, or better quality, right? You might decide to add animation to your game if you know how to do that. I don't think we've talked about animation in my lessons yet, but if you know how to add animation, that would be a great time to do that in the polishing phase. Polishing phase is a great time to add music and sound effects. You don't need music and sound effects in the prototypes. They're just to test the game to make sure they're working correctly. But you definitely want your game to have music and sound effects before you release it to the public. Giving it instructions, detailed instructions, so that people can read your instructions and they know how to play your game, and because you're not sitting there telling them, right? When you're doing the testing and feedback, you're usually there with the person explaining how to play your game. But before you publish it, you need there to be instructions in the game that people can follow. So that's the polishing phase. Before you release it, right here, does the game meet the plan? Yes, I would put a polish before the release, right? So improve your graphics, add your sound, add instructions, any of those little things that don't actually change gameplay, but just make your game look and feel finished, right? That's what we mean by polishing. You're making it pretty. You're making it presentable for the public. And then when you're done, you release it. You share it with people. Make Code Arcade makes that easy because they give you a little link that you can then use to email friends, family, things of that nature. Or you could even post it on forums. Make Code Arcade has their own forum they can use. Or here on my YouTube channel, I want to see your games. You can post them in the comments, right? So that is the design process that I go through with my students. And like I said, this whole thing usually takes about 2 to 3 weeks to take an idea from beginning to end. At this point, I just kind of want to walk you through how I might do that. I'm going to mirror this as a student. So this is a pair deck that I actually use with my students, which allows them to take notes. So the first step is the concept step where we're just brainstorming. When you're brainstorming, never stop with one idea. Right? If you only write down your first idea and you stop there, your first idea is almost never your best idea. Okay? So when you're brainstorming, you really want to have several. I would say at least 3 or 4. You can do more than that. Some of my students will write 5 or 6, but write down a few ideas. If you're having a hard time coming up with ideas, think about the games that you enjoy playing. Think about the things that you've been building in the last few weeks. Which of the projects that you were working on did you have the most fun with? Do you think you could do even more with that kind of idea? Think about the games that you like to play. Is there a game style that you think is really fun and you think maybe you could make your own version of that game? Keep in mind, when you're building these games, these are original games. They should be your own game, but it is perfectly okay for you to be inspired by someone else's game. Make sense? It is perfectly okay for you to think about something that you like to play and make your own version of it. So for instance, if I really like Angry Birds, I might decide to make an Angry Birds style game. Now, am I copying them? I shouldn't be, right? But it could be a similar style where Angry Birds has things flying across the screen, knocking things over. So maybe I want to try to make a game that's like that. Maybe I want to make a game that's similar to Frogger or Crossy Road, I think some of you guys call it. At this point in time, I probably don't know enough to make a good version of that game. That'd be pretty hard. So that one's probably not going to be ideal for where we're at right now. But thinking about the projects that we've done, we've built chasing games, we built clicker games, we built projectile games. Maybe I want to do something similar to a projectile game. On that one project, we started making something similar to Space Invaders. So maybe I could do something like that. Or, oh, you know what else might be kind of cool? Maybe I could do something similar to a brick breaker game. I really like those. I don't know if you guys have ever played those, but a block breaker type game could be a lot of fun. And it's not one that I've ever built before, so that would be a fun challenge for me. What other style games might I like to build? Oh, you know what? We were doing bouncing and jumping and all of that. Maybe I want to do something similar to a doodle jump type of game. So those are my ideas, right? So those are my brainstorming ideas for things that I might want to build. As I'm looking through this list, this is the part where I really need to narrow it down. This is the part where I need to decide which of these games I really want to focus on. Which of these games is the one that I want to build for this project, the one that I want to spend the next 2 to 3 weeks on. Looking at it, I think the Frogger style game is going to be too complicated for the skills that I've learned so far. Projectile game might be too easy because I've already built a few projectile things. Angry Birds would use physics, and that'd be pretty fun. I would have to learn a new skill about how to stack sprites on top of each other. So that might be a little challenging, but it might be a good challenge. So I'm thinking either the Angry Birds, the Block Breaker, or the Doodle Jump. I think I want to go with the Block Breaker game. For the purpose of this video, I think I'm going to go with the Block Breaker game. But if I was a student, I might spend a little bit more time brainstorming these out. All right, so I'm going to go with the Block Breaker for now. So the next part of the concept phase, we're not done yet. We just came up with a basic idea. Before I start building it, I still need to plan this out more. So the next part is where I have my students actually sketch out what they would want the game to look like. So this is a helpful process when it comes to design. Even if you're not an artist, which I certainly am not, coming up with a simple sketch can help you. Oh, wow, that's really bad. Can help you visualize what your game's going to look like. So in my game, if I'm playing a block breaker type game, I'm going to have rows of bricks, multiple rows of bricks. I'm going to have a paddle, and I'm going to have a ball, right? Let me use the pencil for that. And I'm going to have a ball. And the ball will have to bounce off the paddle. I'm going to use a different color for the arrows. So the ball will bounce off the paddles and will also bounce off the bricks. So I'll definitely need to use some bouncing skills like we learned about in that one lesson, right? To make it bounce off the paddle and bounce off the bricks. But when it bounces off the bricks, it will also need to delete those bricks, right? And what else will my game need? Well, it'll probably also need the ball to bounce off the walls, or else it won't work correctly. And I will need there to be something at the bottom so that if the ball hits the floor, it will be destroyed, right? I'm going to use the text thing down here and call that the dead zone. So I've got the ball, I've got bouncing, I've got a paddle, that's the player. I've got bricks that are destroyed when you hit them. I have bouncing off the wall. What else does my game need? Oh, it'll probably need some points, which I might put up here in the corner, right? That would make sense. And yeah, so that's not a bad little plan. So as I'm drawing this sketch, I'm thinking ahead about the things that my game is going to need, right? Well, I should probably also signal here that the ball will bounce off the walls if it hits it, right? So a lot of bouncing going on in this game. A lot of physics in this game. Okay, so now that I have my sketch and I've got an idea of what my game's going to look like, I'm still in the planning process. So the next part is where I have my students actually put a list together of what their game is going to need. So this is kind of helps you plan out before you code. So we still haven't coded anything yet. We're still in the planning phase. So the game is going to need a ball, which we talked about. It's going to need a paddle. It's going to need bricks in rows, which indicates if we're going to have multiple bricks in rows like that, that kind of suggests that I'm probably going to need to use loops, right? Just like we did on the Space Invader lesson. So what else am I going to need? I'm going to need some bouncing physics for the ball. And that's going to happen when it hits the walls, paddle, or bricks. And what else did we say? Let me go back to my sketch. So I've got a ball, I've got bouncing physics. Oh, the paddle's going to need to move. That should be in my plan, right? So my paddle needs to move. Now, to make the game the way I want it to work, I probably just want it to move left and right, not up and down. In fact, I might want to put that in the sketch. So the paddle can move left or right. Okay, so let's put that in the features. So we have a paddle that moves left and right only. And I can definitely do that with the skills that we've learned. So a big part of creating this plan is just helping decide what skills that you've learned, what coding aspects you're going to need to put in your game. The ball is going to need to have probably a velocity on it, right? A speed. Now, exactly how I want that to work, I don't know. I may have to play around with that a little bit when I build the game. Decide how fast it's going to go, which direction it's going to go, things like that. Anything else that I need to add? Oh, yeah, I need the bottom part. I'm going to need a dead zone. I'll just call it dead zone for now until I come up with a better word for it. Destroys ball if player misses. Ooh, you know what? That suggests I might also want to add to my game health, right? So in addition to points, I might need to have health or lives. Lives might make more sense for how many balls I have before the game ends, right? So that could be something I need to put into my game. So I can't forget points and lives. And that's pretty good. That's a pretty good plan I've got in place. So at this point in time, I'm pretty much done with my concept. I know what type of game I'm going to make. I have a rough idea of what it's going to look like, and I have a pretty decent idea of what I'm going to need to code to make this work. So now's the part where I would actually start coding it, right? I'm not going to go through all that with you guys because that would take me a long time to fully to build the game in front of you. But I wanted you to see the planning process because that's really the most important part. So at this point in time, I would go into Make Code Arcade and I would start building out my game, right? Now, it is absolutely not okay to steal someone else's work and call it your own, right? It is not okay to take someone else's code and to repackage it and say it's your program. But if it's your code, it is absolutely okay to go back to one of your old programs and edit it. Does that make sense? So if I wanted to, I could go back to this program, which I built earlier, and I could make edits to this and try to turn this into a block breaker game. Or I could just use code similar to what I did with the ducks to create my bricks for my game, right? So that'd be a good way to help me save time and not have to reinvent the wheel, as it were. Okay, so yes, after I have my concept, my next step would be building it out using those list of features that I came up with as my plan. I would build out a prototype to make sure it's playable. Then I would ask someone to test my game. It could be family, friends, classmates, whatever the case is. And I would go through this whole process, testing and improving, testing and improving, testing and improving, testing and improving. Then towards the end, before I share it with the world, I make my final changes to it. The polishing phase, where I make it all pretty, make sure all my sprites are unique. So I always like to, if you're making an original game, you should have original sprites, right? So even though I may only use images from the gallery for my prototype, I like to use my own images, my own sprites for a finished game. So you want to customize it and do the little polishing here at the end with your own unique sprites, sound effects, instructions, all that jazz, and then share your game with the world. I'm going to finish this video now because I feel like I've went into enough detail over all of this. I hope you learned something new here today, and I want you to go ahead and start building your own original game. Take your time. Do not rush this, right? It takes time to build a good game, but please use the process that I've described to you. If you skip these steps, you're just going to end up hurting yourself. So for instance, if you spend a lot of time on the polishing step at the end, and you're spending a lot of time building cool sprites, but you haven't built the game yet, that's wasted time. Because it's very possible that once you've built out your game, those sprites that you built might not make sense for the game. Or you may spend 2 days building cool sprites and then end up changing your concept. Now you've wasted those 2 days. You following me? So as you're building the game, use the process. Plan it out. Come up with your idea. Plan it out. Build your prototype, test it, improve, test, improve, test, improve, test, improve. And then at the end, build your cool sprites, build your sound effects, build your introduction with instructions, and then share your game. Okay? All right. I want to see what you guys make. Please, please, please show it to me. Put your favorite games in the comments. And you know what? I think I'll share one of my games with you guys in the description of this video. Can't wait to see what you guys make. If you do see some games in the comments, play each other's games, right? And give each other positive feedback. We only do positive feedback on this channel, so let's not be throwing any negative words around in the chat, in the comments. All right, I'll see you guys later. Good luck. Have fun. Build some great games. Take care.